Oh, no,
The
that's
preference is just the last name.
Exactly. I guess we'll start. David said he would be here at 6:31 or 6:32, depend upon traffic and I think the solar lunar cycles. Janie, thank you for getting us organized and situated as usual. Hopefully doors will cooperate. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the appointed hour of 6:30. I'd like to call our work session to order and turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our purpose here on the work session is to hear from our city auditors, as we normally do each year. And we have with us Ms. Emily Veers, who will go over our FY22 audit.
Emily, welcome.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. As always, you're probably well aware that I'm a creature of habit, so hold your shock. I'm going to do things just a little bit differently this year.
Alphabetically.
Oh, alphabetically. Yes, exactly.
Yes, sir. It is still 6:30.
Yeah, you're right on time.
You should have in front of you a small audit presentation file. This probably looks like normal. Your actual set of audit reports, your financial statements are in the box back there with Jen. So I don't know if you've seen an electronic copy of them yet, but once you get into the reports, if you have any questions, my contact information is on the front of the presentation file. So as always, you're welcome to reach out to me. But I thought that we would, rather than flipping through that large report, just jump right into the presentation. So hopefully we'll start on page 1 of the presentation file. Essentially, this just goes over the 3 different types of auditors reports that are included in your annual financial statements. The first is the independent auditors report. This is essentially where we take a look at the numbers and opine on whether we think that they're materially correct in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. You guys have a clean, unmodified opinion, so that's what you want. That just means that the numbers we think are materially correct. The next auditor's report is what I usually refer to as the yellow book report. This is where we take a look at internal control matters. We don't test to the level of opining on them, but we do gain an understanding of your internal controls. And then we also look at compliance related matters that the APA requires we look at to ensure you're compliant with the Code of Virginia. Based on the procedures that we performed, we did not have any non-compliance that was noted. We do have one item related to material adjustments proposed as part of the audit process. Of any finding that you're going to have in a report, this is the one that you would want or that you would take. It really doesn't deal with the day-to-day operations of the city. It's really just getting the numbers in accordance with all of the new 100 and some GASB standards that are out. So it's a lot for one person or a team of just a couple of people to do on an annual basis. So there is one item noted, but it's really not of much concern to me from an audit standpoint. The last report is in accordance with uniform guidance. You all have received and expended technically in excess of $750,000 in federal funds the last couple of years. I was actually surprised to see that ARPA was not in that. You all did not spend your ARPA yet. That's actually ESSER funding that the school board received, and they're reported on your CFA. So their ESSER funding and their special education went up this year. So we did single audits over those 2 programs. Essentially here we look at the overarching uniform guidance requirements and then the programs that are selected for testing. We look at control related matters and then compliance. And again, you guys have a clean, unmodified opinion. So we didn't have any non-compliance or internal control related matters related to those programs. I would expect that we'll have this again next year. Hopefully, as you all start spending down your ARPA funds, we'll have at least one more year of single audit, depending on how quickly or how slowly you all utilize those funds. A couple of things that are not on the sheet itself that are in the report that I just wanted to mention. On page 5 of the report, when you get it, not in this file in front of you, sorry, is the GFOA certificate. Just a reminder that you guys did apply for and receive the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. So I think that that speaks volumes to the team that you have, that they're able to get the financials done and ready and get that certificate every year. I know Jen's going to apply for it again, so hopefully you'll get that again next year. You haven't seen it yet, but the report again has grown compared to last year. So if you all don't have the desire or the willingness or the time to read all 160 some pages of the report, you might read the management's discussion and analysis. It's about 10 pages and it hits the highlights for you. So just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. If there aren't any questions on this, we'll touch on the numbers just a little bit on the next couple pages. So we're going to skip page 2. Page 3 is essentially the general fund on a modified basis. It's the income statement scheduled out for the last 5 years, just so that you can kind of see how revenues and expenditures are growing or declining. Just a couple of things to mention. You can see that other local taxes have grown pretty significantly at 6.3%. That's an annualized growth rate that's meant to smooth the effects of any outlying transactions in any one year. That's predominantly meals tax, sales tax, business licenses, and hotel taxes. Obviously, in 2020 and 2021, those were down a little bit because of the pandemic. But even overall, I think that you've seen about $1 million worth of growth in that area. Intergovernmental revenues, again, did not grow quite as much as I expected. Last year, you had CARES funding of about $1 million in your intergovernmental. And then in 2018, it was higher because you had FEMA and State of Good Repair grants of about $800,000. So I expect, again, that number will go up as you start using your ARPA funds.
So do we know, I'm sorry, do we know if you backed out those ARPA funds, do you know what the growth rate would be? Do you have any idea?
So your CARES funding and your CARES expenditures in 2021 were about $1 million. So if you backed that off, then you went from 3 million in 2019. And I think in 2018, those unusual grants were about 800,000. So that would have been about 2.6 to 3, back to 2.6 to 2.7, and then again at 2.7. There's no ARPA money in that 2.7 that you see in 2022 since you haven't spent it yet. So I expect that that will grow. And I've been trying, I don't know what the federal government's going to do. I would think at some point they have to run out of money to keep giving to localities. In 2009, after the housing market, there was the crash and all the ARA money came out. And then after that dwindled, the federal and state revenue that localities saw actually dropped to pre-housing market crash levels. So I've just been trying to, I would expect that at some point these numbers have to come back down. They may come back down lower than they used to be, which kind of segues, nicely into the bottom of the page. You can see your all's reserve balances. You can see your reserved as a calculation of unassigned fund balance and then cash and investment balances. GFOA recommends that you have 2 months of reserves on hand, which works out to like 17%. So you all do have an excess of the recommendation from GFOA. You probably remember that I am conservative, so I prefer to have higher reserve balances so that you have funds aside in case something should happen. I think given that the state and federal funding, I would think will drop off at some point once you all run out of your ARPA money, and that interest rates are up and likely to go up further. Borrowing debt is not going to be as appealing. So if you have projects or something comes up that's unexpected, that's not budgeted, I think that you guys are set up pretty well with reserves, that you are going to be able to deal with those things that maybe other localities that aren't quite as well planned and prepared might face some trouble with that. Usually you'll see down at the bottom, the ending fund balance and then the ending cash and investment. The percentages usually go very close together. They trend within a few percentage points of each other. That's the ARPA money. You've got the ARPA cash in your cash and investment accounts. but you don't have anything down in unassigned fund balance because it's reported as unearned revenue. So that's why they've kind of drifted apart a little bit. But I would expect that as you spend that money, those percentages will come closer together like they normally are. On the next couple of pages, just a couple of pie charts that you guys always see. Maybe they're helpful, maybe they're not. I don't really know. But they just show your revenues and expenditures from 2018 to 2022 and where you generate money and where you expend your money. Maybe it helps as you're working on budgeting or planning over the next few years just to see what local dollars you have control over and what contributes to your budget and then where you spend your money. On page 6 is your utility fund income statement, sort of like we just went over with the general fund. You can see that operating revenues and operating expenses are going up in line with each other. Operating expenses are growing just a little bit faster than operating revenues. I know that you all did have a rate increase in 22. You have another rate increase in 2023. I know that it's difficult to have rate increases every year. It's probably not something that people enjoy doing, but I think it's great to keep it up and keep it consistent with the increases that you're seeing for Maury Service Authority. I think personally, at least, that it's better to raise it incrementally than to have a big 30, 40, 50% increase all of a sudden in 5 years down the road. So I just want to commend you. That's not something that I think a lot of localities do, and sometimes it might be a little bit better, even though it's not an easy decision. So they're trending pretty closely. I think that your percentage was just a little bit higher increase in 2023, if I looked at that correctly. So hopefully it should stay pretty close together so that your revenues are at least keeping up with your expense increase. On the next page it's just a debt summary. This does have actual debt issuances, and it also has, accounting accruals for pension, compensated absences, OPEB liabilities, and things like that. You had a debt issuance in the water and sewer fund this year, I believe, of about 5.7 million to fund some projects, if I remember correctly. And then otherwise, you were just paying off your debt balances in accordance with your amortization schedules. I think a lot of people this year are seeing significant fluctuations in the pension liabilities. You can see that your pension liability at the city level went from 3.5 million to 200,000, 300,000. That's purely just market fluctuations. The market in 2020 was down significantly due to the pandemic. In 2021, which is what this is based on, the market had a really good year, and so you had really good returns on your pension amounts. If you compare, people seem sticker shocked when they see that, but if you look at the balance sheet in the report and you compare the pension asset or liability with the deferred outflows and inflows that offset those from 2022 to 2021, the overall impact on net position is minimal. That's done intentionally. The deferred outflows and inflows, the changes in the market calculations and the fluctuations is amortized in over 4 years so that you don't see a drastic swing in your net position. So I think people get nervous when they see that, but that change did not fall all the way down to net position. Towards the bottom, just under the highlighted blue, are the state averages. 2022 is not available yet. That's from the APA comparative cost report that comes out in the winter, early spring sometime. I usually don't look too much at those, but I know that people like to see them. So that's included there if you like to look at it. The next page is management recommendations or audit recommendations for management. Not really anything significant here. If they were more significant, they would have been included in the report. I generally don't go into too much detail with the comments here. If you all have questions or want me to go over anything, I'd be happy to, but
I do have a question, briefly, with the written policies for federal programs. Would that be alluding to forthcoming expenditures for ARPA funds? What is considered a federal program that you found that the school board and the city did not have a written policy for?
So the uniform guidance requires that you have written policies if you expend any federal dollars.
Okay.
So in theory, they should be in place already because you're expending federal dollars, but they relate to conflicts of interest, procurement, cash management. There's all sorts of different attributes, and it's just a uniform guidance requirement.
Okay, so that would
Um,
be something that would probably be potentially a recommendation that you might make to every locality, every
Yes.
school board, maybe not completely pointed right at Lexington, for example.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
that is, if I had to pick a percentage, I would say that probably 50 to 75% of my clients have that same comment this year. A lot of it is because it was a relatively new requirement a few years ago, and then a lot of places that didn't have single audits, sort of like Lexington, it wasn't really on the radar until you were required to have one.
Okay, and kind of following up on that, you earlier, you mentioned about expending ARPA funds and that we haven't really jumped into that just yet, and you were a little bit surprised, but when we do, because we will, have you worked with city staff to provide guidance on what you have seen from other municipalities or that have begun expending their dollars so that we do it well and we do it right and it's easy to report?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, from my perspective, I think that we've chatted about it. I'm certainly happy to chat about it some more. We definitely had some localities that jumped right in and didn't necessarily have all their policies in place, all their I's dotted and T's crossed. But there is luckily at least a question in all of the ARPA guidance that if you report something that turns out that it's unallowable, you can replace those funds, which is not always a thing that they allow in the federal government when they give you a grant like that. But I can certainly provide some guidance or some input maybe from what we've seen from other localities of what works well and what maybe doesn't work quite as
If
well.
our team wants it, that'd be fantastic. Just, it's always good to learn from the professional that comes back behind us and checks on us and
Yeah.
everything, what you've seen. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Emily, I believe if in our population category, if we have less than 10 million, cannot we spend that without any requirements at all at this point in time, as far as what we spend it on?
Not really.
Not really?
No, I think that when everyone saw the $10 million loophole, for lack of a better word, for revenue replacement, everybody got really excited that you could just spend it on whatever you wanted to, and you didn't have to adhere to the federal requirements. You can originally, under revenue replacement, you had to do a calculation and prove that you had revenue loss. And that was the amount that you could use. Now you can go up to 10 million, which you all are under, but you still have to use it for general government services. And you still have to undergo all of the same testing under the federal program to make sure that you've used it appropriately, but you can use it for any general government service, but you have to document so that we can match the revenue. And I think that that's kind of, a lot of people have kind of stumbled over that a little bit.
That was my thought. We could use it for
Yeah,
government expenses, general expenses.
yeah.
Thank you.
And just saying, the first item that came up about that was the losses. We were concerned what that losses would be, because that would be unencumbered. We could spend that money pretty much as we wanted. And now that number cap is for us under 10 million. And so we could still spend it as long as it's government
Mhm.
related.
Yep, on any government service. Any other questions? The next couple of pages are just a required communication letter. You guys have a pretty boring boilerplate letter. It's a good thing. There's nothing really exciting to talk about here. It does mention that you did not adopt any new accounting standards during the year. We did evaluate GASB 87 with Jen. She worked very hard to gather all of the leases for the city and compile spreadsheets of all the information from those leases. At the end of the day, once you accumulated all of the balances, they were not material. And so we elected not to record them and not to implement the standard. One of the recommendations on the previous page is that you all consider evaluating your capitalization thresholds for capital assets, sort of in line with this lease standard, so that you can evaluate your leases, your thresholds, and see if you might want to raise them a little bit. A lot of places have gone to picking up assets at 2 years instead of 1 year life. We have examples that we can send if that's something that you all are interested into. Otherwise, the letter is pretty much the same as previous years, nothing to really go over. The next few pages are the, some of the proposed audit entries as part of the process. Some of these entries are entries that Jen gave us after the fact that we posted on our side. So I won't go into detail with those. They're there if you want to look at them. Page 19, GASB is still very busy. So these are the new upcoming standards for the next few years. If you're tired tonight, I think that these will surely help you at the end of the night to get some rest. But more standards are on the way to be implemented in the near future. That's really all I had to go over. I do want to commend your staff and your people that we work with directly. I think that all these new pots of money have come with lots of strings and lots of other things that they have to do. It's hard to keep people. There's just a lot going on, and we certainly appreciate the staff that you have. We appreciate that they work well together. They work well with us, and they really prioritize us when we're there trying to get the audit done, so that we can be in and out as efficiently as possible, and they can get back to their day-to-day jobs. I think everybody thinks I say that everywhere. That's not something that I can say everywhere. So we really do appreciate the group that you guys have. That was all that I had to go over. If anybody has any other questions or anything else, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Emily. Members of council have any questions, thoughts, reflections?
I'll ask one that it's out of ignorance. So on the letter, you had the payroll accruals and the CSA reimbursement requests. Those were items that have been taken care of. You didn't see any concerns with that?
Those were just that there were a couple of voided checks. And when we looked, they do CSA reimbursement requests, and we weren't quite able to tell whether those voided checks had been included or excluded from the reimbursement request. It wasn't a material amount, so I'm not sure if those have been followed up on and if that has been determined or not, but we couldn't tell for sure that they had been requested incorrectly. We just
Okay.
wanted to make sure somebody looked at it. That makes sense.
Yeah, right.
Very good. Well, thank you for an excellent presentation, but you had great material to work with. And we're equally as excited about our staff and the warm reception that they give your firm and the work that they do for all of our citizens. So thank you for being with us. Have a safe journey back to Blacksburg, and we'll look forward to the next opportunity to review our records and keep us on the right track.
The home in the historical district can make home.
Thank you, Emily. Anticipating that Jen doesn't have anything to rebut of the auditor's report, we will stand adjourned and reconvene for our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you all.
Was here, and there was a meeting. with the electoral board. Up on the community. Yeah, downstairs. The argument.
And taxes that they do. It doesn't say particularly all taxes, so cigarette tax.
Yeah.
Fair game. Ooh, doggy. We did, it was when they took away the card counts. That was, I think that was, actually, I think it was included. I think it was a fee. I think that was.
We're gonna be doing this then.
7:30? No, not with the presentations that we have. The JMU team is a 20-minute presentation. So we should be out 7:40. There's Zoom.
But anyway, so it should be interesting.
Absolutely. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the December 1st edition of the Lexington City Council meeting. Glad you all are here, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. The first order of business, if you all will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. And worth noting, if you hadn't seen, the Advocate is out today, and Doug was delivering papers, so I think his chair is vacant and won't be joining us this evening. He usually gets tuckered out by the evening after his deliveries, so we'll miss him, but I know that he'll enjoy reviewing the tape. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes or modifications. And unless there's an objection from council, we'll approve the agenda as presented. It is approved. Next item, presentations. And I'd like to invite Nick Betts, David Ziegler, and Chuck Smith to meet me down front for a presentation of election certificates. Give folks something to shoot. Right. Face your friends. As you all know, we had elections in November, and the citizens of Lexington, these were the three victors, and there's certification from the electoral board and signed by Norton Blackwell. But I wanted to present these to each of the new city council members, two who are renewing and one who is new. It reads as follows. To all whom is present shall come greeting. This is to certify that at a meeting of the electoral board of the city of Lexington held on November 14th, 2022, on an examination of the official records deposited in the office of the clerk of the circuit court, it was ascertained and determined that at the election held on November 8th, 2022, these three gentlemen were duly elected members of the Lexington City Council for a term commencing January 1st, 2023, and ending December 31st, 2026. Witness the following official signature and seal of the board of Lexington, Virginia, the 30th day of November, 2022, and signed by the secretary, Dorothy S. Blackwell. I'd like to present these to each of you. Thank you for your service coming up and current and in the future. Remind you that we'll have a swearing in ceremony after the end of the year, but before our first meeting. That's to be sworn. So, congratulations and thank you so much. Next item on the agenda, we will hear from Alexia Smith, the Friends of the Brushy Hills Report. Alexia, thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your work on the Brushy Hill Trail.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and hope I can figure out how to work this. Um, I'm going to mostly tell you about what we've done lately, and I think you have or will have shortly the map with basic information about the history of the property and what the Friends of Brushy Hills have done, what we mostly do. So I'm going to be talking about what we've done lately and what we have in the works. Let's see, how do I do this? Ah, yes, I think that's right. That's before I start that, did I miss one? I think so. I think I've got it. Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is where we want to be. Just a reminder of some of the activities in Brushy Hills. It's all passive reservation recreation that's harmless to the environment there. So you can see by looking at the pictures what goes on. You might wonder about those folks up in the upper right corner. Those are bird watchers. They're either seeing a bird or trying to. Hiking, running, mountain biking, family outings, dog walking, enjoyment of nature.
Alexia, I'm going to invite you to speak a little bit louder
Oh,
again.
yes,
in there.
okay. And now on to recent work by the Friends. Does that do it?
Yes.
We are continuing to work on the invasive plants in Brushy Hills. So volunteer work, groups of volunteers come out to help us with that. In this case, the picture is of the Buffalo Creek school boys with supervision by us. And we've had several groups help us with that. Other work, we made some signs along, there is a pipeline right of way that slices right through Brushy Hills. And it's the one area where up until now, people have been able to just drive in, not even realizing perhaps that they were crossing a boundary. And that would happen with ATMs and pickup trucks that made a mess when they came in and are not allowed in the property. So we designed and had made some signs that welcome others but not motorized vehicles. So that discourages everybody but a few rascals. And on the right there is what happens when somebody decides to come in and have some fun knocking over a signpost or two or three in this case. So occasionally we have to do some repair of vandalism. That happens less and less as time goes on, which is just wonderful. Some expert volunteers here, the Friedrichses who know historic masonry work. This is a spring house, not the spring house that you may know there that's right on the road, but another one that's out in the woods a little bit. They did the repointing on this structure and also replaced some of the wooden parts that were not in good shape. And on the right, you see the result. It's really worth a look because they did a beautiful job. We're very lucky in the expertise that people bring and offer freely out of love for Brushy Hills, really. I should have said that several members of the steering committee are here. You want to stand up? Dave Agner and Peggy Agner and David Rocher. And Peggy, I think this is you on the bench. A couple of volunteers made 4 benches on a pattern by the great 20th century early conservationist Aldo Leopold. Very simple, nice benches that work very well. And we have an improved map, I say, made with the help of geologist David Harbour at Washington and Lee. He really did a lot of work on that. I should say we helped him perhaps. So you have that in hand there. And then works in progress, which I don't always have pictures of because they're in progress. But this picture is of a sinkhole, of which there are quite a few out in Brushy Hills. And David Harbour, again, the geologist, that's one of his specialties. You're smiling, Chuck.
It's quite a few is an understatement. Sinkholes, Brushy Hill.
Sink. So David has done a nature walk on showing us sinkholes and telling us about them, and plans to do that probably not until next fall. Some of the other walks on the list here probably will be coming up in the spring. People have committed themselves to that. Professors Connors and Gaylord, geologist and archaeologist, like to do that together, and that's a really good, fascinating time. And a couple of people who are ecologists can talk about the forest ecology in very interesting ways. So those are look like they're likely for the spring. And then David Rocher, who is here, knows trees extremely well and has committed to quarterly tree walks at the 4 different seasons. So we've had 2 of those, and those will be ongoing. We're planning a large panel for the kiosk to replace the little bits of paper that are, I didn't bring a picture of because it's going to be looking better soon. And it will feature this new map and also some information about the forest and the geology that it's rests upon. And another project Peggy Agner is involved in, and some other volunteers. We got rid of the grass around the main spring house, the town spring, and there will now be the natives come back when you take away. That's one of the great pleasures of working on these invasive plants. If you get them out of the way, the natives, lo and behold, they do come back on their own, and maybe some planting too. That's going to improve the looks of that and provide a kind of garden for people to learn from and enjoy. This is something we're really excited about. We're going to have a self-guided tree walk on a loop that's a small loop of fairly easy trails, about 25 trees, and there will be signs somewhat like this one, I mean, designed along these lines, identifying the tree, and each sign will have a QR code on it linking to a website, a web page with more information on the trees. So that involves quite a bit of doing, and I'm guessing we'll have a grand opening of that in the spring, perhaps. And then we're thinking too of having more trees marked outside this loop in various places around the preserve that you can learn about on the website or find on your own, other more species, and just interesting trees. Here's a map dating from 1883 that I find delightful to look at. I can't quite match it up with the terrain, but it's standing here for a longer term project that's underway to have a history display eventually about Brushy Hills and what was there before the town got involved with it and so on. Other works in progress include moving towards a more formal structure than we have now. We have always been a steering committee with some informal officers. We really need to get more formal with bylaws and memberships for the sake of our future, our longevity as a group. And as part of that, really, we're setting up an adopt a trail system for trail maintenance. So it doesn't just depend on us calling in people as we need them, but there'll be people responsible for that in a longer term way. I put in these colorful members of the Brushy Hills Forest community because numbers don't have colors for most people anyway. But I'm not going to read those numbers off, but as you can see there, we have a small budget. These are 2021 numbers, and there'll be something like that for this year too, maybe more higher expenses. The Nasty Nine Trail Run has enabled us really not to do a whole lot of fundraising. There's spontaneous funds come in, but we've always had good response when we ask for funds. So on our at this level, we're doing fine. And really what makes that low budget possible is another number here, the volunteer hours that people put in. Nobody gets paid for anything. And I should say that David Rocher, who is here, does the mammoth amount of work here. He's active in all sorts of ways, and the longevity of the group is important for someday when there won't be a David Rocher, or for that reason, for that matter, any of the rest of us. I mean, we have the same, we're facing the same thing that many volunteer groups do, that, you know, we need to find the next half generation or generation. We're lucky to have a couple of people who actually have jobs and kids who give their time. We are looking into the future with hope that we can keep this going. And my last slide here is a kind of Thanksgiving to the forest. All forests, and in particular the Brushy Hills Forest, just by being there, give humans a lot. That's what's called ecosystem services. Recreation, possibilities for recreation is obvious one. Mental and physical health benefits beyond just getting out and getting some exercise. There's research being done on how beneficial it is just to be in nature. It's good for your blood pressure and many other, reduces stress, lots of good effects. Support for biodiversity. Brushy Hills has long been a destination for bird watchers. I mean, long decades, and still is. Carbon storage. And a forest, of course, absorbs rainfall and snow melt, and thereby conserves soil and conserves water. So thanks to Brushy Hills. And I'd like to thank all of you also for recognizing us as the stewards of the Brushy Hills Preserve. That's really given our group a great boost. Your vote of confidence for us, and we will hope to live up to that and keep doing it. I don't know if there's time for questions. I'd be glad to answer questions if.
Thank you, Alexia. Members of council have any questions? Hearing Chuck?
Not a question, but a comment of sincere appreciation of what the Friends do for Brushy Hills. I often go out there to unplug for a while and enjoy the trail system out there. That I don't know the last time I've been out there where I didn't see David Rocher's car there.
Yes.
And I asked him at one point how many hours he estimates a year he puts into trail maintenance, not just for Brushy Hills, but for
Yes.
a number of trails around the region. And it was hundreds of hours that David puts into improving and maintaining the trail system that we kind of take for granted. So I wanted to personally thank David for the hard work he does. Not only Brushy Hills, but everywhere else, but especially Brushy Hills, because it is really a nice asset. It's a fantastic asset we have in the city. And you and I have talked a few times about the future of Brushy Hills, and I'm encouraged to see the direction that's going. Like the new benches I noticed out there a few trips ago, and the little things that you see added are delightful to see, and sincere thanks. So
That's very, very good to hear. Thank you, Chuck.
And Alexia, as you mentioned, the cooperation and the memorandum of understanding that the city has with the Friends and
Yes.
recognizing their efforts in support of this trail system. And you and your band of merry people are to be applauded also for encouraging the youth, such as the Buffalo Boys School, to come out and integrate and get vested in this gem that we have in our community. So the cooperation and with the resources of Washington Lee and VMI, the professors, and then the natural supporters in our community like David make for a beautiful complement to make it all move forward and be a place where we can unload our burdens and see the stars. So thank you very, very much.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
We're grateful for your presentation and more so for your work, and wish you and the rest of the Friends of Brushy Hill. We'll put a plug in for anybody listening. If you're new to town and looking for something to do in the country, you're welcome weed pullers and others and students who may be here looking for ways to spend their time or let their friends know. The Friends is open and willing to have you come and volunteer.
Thank you. Thank you all. Anybody want to have a guided tour also? We'd love to see you out there.
Outstanding. Thank you, Alexia. The next item on our agenda is a JMU student research group that is zooming in for approximately a 20-minute presentation. And I'm going to call on the city manager to make some introductions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep this brief because the research group does have a full report for you here this evening. I will say, however, that last summer I was contacted by Dr. Sombo Musada. She had gotten my name, understood that Lexington was interested in housing, rental housing in particular, and that might be a good project to do some research on to determine maybe what's happening here, how changes in the housing market affects our community. We determined that, yes, it would be a good topic for research, and she started working with her students, and they do have a report for you this evening. There's no action required by City Council. Of course, you can ask any questions that you have, but I think the students came up from what I've seen of the work with some interesting information and observations, and I will turn it over to Dr. Musada. I don't know the names and faces of the individuals she has with her, but I'm sure she'll do those introductions.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here present and to have the students make this presentation on the findings from the study. So I have Raymond Curtis and Denise Frisky, who are going to make the presentation on behalf of the graduate students in the MPA program here at James Madison University. Raymond and Denise, over to you.
So I'm Denise. We conducted our Community of Change project on the housing in Lexington, Virginia. Myself and Raymond worked with other classmates, Angelina, Stephen, Rollin, Muhammad, Bright, and Max, to come up with this presentation.
Just one moment and I will begin to share screen. Technical difficulties. Okay, can everyone see it well? Yes. Good.
So we'll look at the problem statement, the context, the methodology, findings, and recommendations. So the city of Lexington has a perceived housing crisis. With rising costs, restrictions on vertical and horizontal growth, and 2 encroaching universities, the city of Lexington is finding itself unable to meet the demand for housing in the area. To further exacerbate the issue, the city of Lexington allows homeowners to partake in short-term rental markets, which parents of many VMI and Washington Lee students are thought to be taking advantage of. The problem of housing is affecting many within and surrounding the city of Lexington. With the lack of housing in the city, many who work in the city or at the 2 universities that surround the city are forced to live in neighboring county or beyond, placing an undue burden on their lives. Additionally, lack of housing in the city and the high percentage of non-taxable land places burden on Lexington residents by means of high property taxes. If this issue persists, more and more workers in Lexington might struggle to find housing in the market and will shift the market elsewhere, causing the city of Lexington and its residents to struggle financially. The city of Lexington highlighted the following. Too few homes have been built during the past 20 years. Housing projects that have been proposed are often opposed by proponents of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Citizens in many areas support new housing development, but it should be somewhere else. New generations of possible homeowners, larger cohorts entering the market, older Americans staying in their homes longer, investment housing and short-term rental depleting home ownership inventory, regional trends and allocation of population, leading to uneven growth in population in some areas of the nation. Workforce and low entry homes are especially difficult to find. We will review history of housing in Lexington and housing data, Sydney ordinance, infrastructure projects, housing and income trends across 5 Virginia cities and towns, and recommendations. At the onset of this project, our team wanted to take time to understand Lexington from some of the city's stakeholders. It was also important for us to gain context about Lexington, its history, and possible goals moving forward. These meetings, visits to the area helped us to better understand Lexington's context as it relates to housing issues here and throughout the Commonwealth. In addition to these interviews, we reviewed relevant literature and research trends to look at particular features of Lexington's situation. In-person interviews were conducted with city officials. The issues that were presented and uncovered were of cost of housing in Lexington, the MOU and height ordinance and short-term rentals and non-taxable land. Currently in Lexington, there are about 31 short-term rentals and approximately 15 to 11 that are thought to be short-term rentals but are not registered with the city. Lexington has a very small amount of taxable land. Only currently 34.5% of the land is taxable, leaving 65.5% non-taxable. We looked at several key characteristics of Lexington that make it a unique city. Lexington has a total population of 7,456. Washington and Lee and VMI combined have approximately 3,881 students, meaning university students account for approximately 52% of Lexington's population. 600 of Lexington's 1,616 acres have been classified as a historical district. The city of Lexington is 2.5 square miles. The main economic sectors in Lexington are the 2 universities and healthcare and social assistance. 2 of Rockbridge County public schools are located within Lexington city limits, taking up prime real estate that Lexington can develop to create more housing. In 1985, Lexington entered into an MOU with Rockbridge County. The MOU prevents Lexington from annexing land owned by Rockbridge County in exchange for an annual payment from the county. The city of Lexington currently has a height ordinance on commercial and residential property. The residential property has a maximum height of 35 feet or 45 feet with additional stipulations. Commercial properties cannot exceed 45 feet in height. This height ordinance possesses problems for the city's problems for building tall apartment buildings that can provide more housing options. Since the city of Lexington cannot build out, the best option may be to build up. The city of Lexington is recognized on the Virginia and National Register of Home Historic Places. The registration for the Virginia and National Register has led to the city and surrounding residential district to be carefully preserved, both in culture and architecture. Lexington has 417 contributing and 65 non-contributing resources, with 11 resources listed on Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places and/or the National Historic Landmarks. Owning a home in a historical district can make home ownership more difficult and expensive, as changing the exterior of the home will need prior approval. Lexington is also home of 2 historic universities, Washington and Lee and VMI.
Right, thank you. Now that we've gone through some of the background and context of what we were looking for, we're going to go over some of the findings that we came across during our research. Here is a chart that shows the population related to the size among the 5 localities that we chose to compare. As you can see here, with the 2.5 square miles and 7,456 population, this is very similar to that of Bridgewater, as you will see down on the 4th level. And the quick math for you here, Harrisonburg also has a similar per square mile population as well. That was interesting to us in the fact that means that Lexington City itself is as populated as Harrisonburg. Considering the differences between those towns, that was a very interesting finding that we came across. As Denise mentioned, the population of Lexington City is 7,456 as of 2021, but 52% of that population is students. And that impacts a number of different things when it comes to data collection, but also just in terms of community development. This chart here was a comparison of population growth that we looked at. In the top right-hand corner, the top left-hand corner, that is Virginia, right? These comparisons are between 1970 and 2021, and the following charts demonstrate the population growth for Waynesboro. On the top center, top right is population growth for Stanton. Bottom left is Rockingham, which is Bridgewater, because that's how this data collection was collected. Bridgewater was labeled as Rockingham. Center bottom is Harrisonburg, and bottom right is Lexington. As you can see here, Lexington is the only locality that does not have an upward trending population over that 51 time period. In fact, depending on where you're looking, it is significantly downward trending due to the population shift from 1970 to the late 1980s here, and hasn't seen any exceptional growth for the rest of the time period. Sorry about the blurriness here. We were working with what we had, but here we have a percentage of persons in poverty. There's another comparison here between 2012 and 2020. This information was pulled from the census. Again, we see similar trends between Waynesboro, Bridgewater, Stanton, and Lexington, with Harrisonburg going against the trend with a drop in poverty by about approximately 10%. But again, we don't see a huge difference between the other surrounding cities. Here we have the median household income, another comparison between the 5 localities. And as you can see here, Bridgewater and Waynesboro and Harrisonburg and Stanton following a similar trend line, with the exception of Lexington here in 2018 to 2020, making a rather large jump in median household income, and that isn't seen in the other cities. Now we move on to the findings of the average home value comparison. This was particularly important to us because of the need to understand if Lexington was experiencing some sort of exceptional increase in home value as compared to other surrounding localities with similar populations and household incomes. Our methodology here was to go across the 5 localities with populations below 50,000 with average household incomes between 40,000 and 60,000 in an attempt to ensure that we were comparing very similar localities. As you can see here, Lexington's increase in average home value comparison is similar to the other ones. Now, when we broke down the percentage increase in that time period, what we saw was that Lexington actually experienced the least percentage increase in average home value. with Bridgewater coming in as second least at 48%. The following three all increased at 50% or more over that time period, which indicates that Lexington has actually had less of an increase in home value than similar localities in Virginia. Next, we moved on to findings of industry and public development. This is important in terms of our recommendations to try and look at all different angles of areas of opportunity for the city of Lexington. The most common employment sector for those who live in Lexington, Virginia, are educational services, with 927 people, according to this. Healthcare and social assistance came in at 42nd with 469 people, and accommodation and food service came in third, 379 people. Now, this chart shows the breakdown of primary industries for residents of Lexington, Virginia. I do want to make you aware, though, that some of these residents may live in Lexington, Virginia, and work somewhere else, but it is somewhat reflective of the industry and the income that is produced in the city of Lexington. Some of the smaller ones, in case some of you can't see here, public administration, manufacturing, finance and insurance, information. Something that we found interesting was that above those that I just listed is arts and entertainment, with a higher percentage of income in the city of Lexington. Furthermore, we also have the Department of Transit land usage for new developments. This is another important observation that was made in our trip with the property that was purchased, and it cannot be used due to the impact that it would have on the infrastructure and the sewage in the city of Lexington. The unused land, it continues to not bring in the tax revenue that it was expected to bring in when it was purchased. Next, we have a breakdown of the units of sale. These are homes for sale in Lexington that we received from a local real estate agency there in Lexington City. When talking with city officials, it was perceived that most of the available properties were listed at 500,000 or more. And as you can see from this list of homes that are currently on the market for Lexington, when we made this chart, 40% of the available homes are actually priced at less than 200,000. Next was something that we came across during our research. I'm going to bear with me as I try to open this link. And now, is it still showing you? I'm going to stop sharing for one quick moment so we can look at this. Some of you may recognize it. It is from March 1st of 2022. Can everyone see this well?
Yes.
This is the Spotswood Collaborative proposal for a development on 2.3 acres, would purchase from the city and develop affordable units. And they break down as you go further down, looking at the projected timeline, proposed property use, proposed purchase price and closing. They gave a very comprehensive idea of what would be expected of the city, what kind of burden it would place on the city, and what kind of revenue and other values that it would bring to the city if it were to be approved. And now I will go back. Okay. Next, I'll cover the interview findings. During the interviews that were conducted in Lexington, when some of our team went down to Lexington, we were able to sit down with the nonprofit local to Lexington to discuss the homeless population. According to some interviews with the locals, downtown residents do not enjoy the things that take away from the environment and the aesthetic of downtown, such as homeless people. Lexington City residents are known to call the police on local homeless that sleep on the steps of the downtown church. A local nonprofit stated that most of the calls for help were received from the Rockingham County residents, however, which demonstrated another possible misconception.
This slideshow's not up, Raymond.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Denise. Okay, now we'll move on to our recommendations. Key considerations developed during our analysis here. First is Lexington's desire to preserve the city's historic attributes, sustain positive relationships with local higher education institutions and nonprofit organizations, and identify ways in which the city could expand housing opportunities for residents and those possibly seeking to live in Lexington. One recommendation that we have come to after our research is to review and update local zoning ordinances to encourage growth. One area to consider is changes to local zoning ordinances that avail opportunities to expand single-family or multifamily dwelling units in the city. Also, opportunities to expand targeted mixed-use commercial residence zoning sites. Another recommendation is to reduce short-term rentals. Limiting short-term rentals such as Airbnb or revising the ordinance regarding these types of rentals is a challenge being looked at by several other municipalities as well. Some considerations might be to implement some type of hotel tax if this is found to be something that is considerable, or multi-property ownership taxes beyond 2 homes owned by a single person. Another recommendation is reconsidering the types of single-family dwellings in the community. Another option for the city is attracting developers to develop alternative styles of housing of communities that could increase available housing units within a specific targeted area. These dwellings could be designed in an aesthetic that would complement and retain Lexington's sort of historic feel. These options could create new accessible housing stock for the first-time home buyers and median income families in the area. Moving on, recommendation for developing and investing in local infrastructure that could support and encourage housing expansion, like what we had referenced in the proposal that I showed you. There are opportunities to leverage and invest in infrastructure in Lexington, particularly with water and sewage, and to attract investment in targeted mixed-use areas that could expand housing and taxable commercial spaces for the city. Additionally, we believe that it would behoove you to conduct an independent census or an independent study on your population where you do not count the student body. It's very difficult to get a clear concept of what the poverty is in Lexington, what the average household income is in Lexington, what the unemployment rate is in Lexington, a number of things. Average age, everything is skewed by the outliers, which are the 52% of students, all with, late teens, early 20s, many of them unemployed, most of them who are employed still fall below the poverty line. However, this is not reflective of the community of Lexington, nor its capabilities. Finally, the last 2 recommendations: consider affordable housing and those who may be experiencing homelessness or home insecurity. As stated, the city is looking at development and the overall housing matter, and it will be important to continue to keep in mind those in the area who may be challenged with securing stable housing. The last recommendation is related to the MOU that we've discussed throughout this presentation. Revisiting the MOU, it will be important for the city to also review it with the county. This is primarily to determine if the MOU is still the optimal policy course for both parties. We'd recommend city leadership review and consider if there may be an alternative agreements, revisions, or other options that could support the long-term partnership between the city and county, while still ensuring that the city of Lexington is well positioned for future development. And that is what we have for you today. Does anybody have any questions?
My first response is, wow, that was a super, a robust report with lots of good information that I've made a couple notes of questions that I have, but I'd invite council questions that you have from the presentation. Mr. Alligood.
Just a point of clarification. You had mentioned in the Spotswood Spotswood document you presented, affordable housing. affordable units. And I want to clarify that we are or are not talking about affordable units. It was my understanding that the developer was not going to undertake building affordable priced units on Spotswood. So it was that a mistake, or did I not hear it right?
It's market rate housing, yeah.
Just based off of what I saw here, it was listed in there that it would be, the development was to include a mix of housing, also include housing that was available towards the lower income households or individuals.
Yeah, that was the memo that you cited, I think, was from the Rockbridge Collaborative. And they had detailed many of those items, but I think the final analysis, I'm not sure when you got, well, that document was from earlier this year. But the final analysis, they were market rate housing, which is the point Mr. Alligood's making.
Right.
So very good. Other questions?
Did you look at the percentage of the housing in Lexington that is rental versus owner occupied?
We were unable to acquire that data, unfortunately. The only way to get that data was to go through the addresses of where Denise, you had this better. It was like where the bills were being sent.
Yeah, we were provided a list of the homes in Lexington and who owned the homes, and they said the best way to figure out which of these are rental properties are to look at where the utility bills are being sent to see if there was a rental property there. There was no definitive data that we could find where anybody in Lexington was able to provide to us on which are rental properties.
Unfortunately, the census data isn't reliable because it incorporates all of the students, which was this is the type of data that would be very valuable to you that you would only be able to get if you conducted your own private census.
Any other questions? Tim, the two questions I had, you suggested that we revisit the MOU with the county. Did you have any specific recommendations from your analysis that we should be pursuing, or just in general, it's an agreement from 1985. How might it be improved looking at it?
So when I was looking at the MOU, they had projected what the income would be from Rockbridge County in 2005. And the projection was only to receive about $500,000 from the county for forgoing their option to annex land. If you can't expand out and you can't create more taxable property, $500,000 seems kind of like a low threshold not to gain more land that you can tax.
Right. Additionally, looking further into the many possible ways that the MOU could feasibly be improved or updated was a bit outside of the scope of what we were able to do during the time frame. But I would approach it by looking into similar MOUs or agreements between cities and counties, and look at more current MOUs and the designs of those that are updated, beyond the 85, preferably something that was within the last 10 years, and start to make comparisons of what that looks like and what the structure looks like, and how you all might be able to work with the county to adjust it, to update it.
Very good. If I'm not mistaken, I think our check is closer to $2 million a year with the revenues, the way the agreement's written. So it's improved as the tax revenues and rates have over the years. So we're doing a little bit better than the 500,000 at this point. The other question I had, I guess from a policy standpoint, you talked about reducing the number of short-term rentals. And I understand the observation for our community, but do you have any information or analysis that shows putting a cap on that is enforceable, effective?
Not a cap. Unfortunately, there are ways in which you can design policy that would make it unfeasible, essentially, to have an excessive amount, if you will, designing policy that would allow individuals to have a single or two, or even just a single, or they can Airbnb their primary space with maybe a room or something like that. But what I have seen in areas in cities that work to limit the Airbnbs is that type of policy where individuals or folks who are abusing it essentially no longer find it financially feasible. They're not making as much money, and that's based off of the policy design. There are also taxes that are now starting to be associated with Airbnbs and categorizing them as hotels and charging them as taxes as you would a hotel that developed in your city.
Right. Yeah, I think we have that implemented, a bed tax for those nights. And I guess we could reduce the amounts in our community if we eliminated residential area short-term rentals. And that was something that we wrestled with in the past 8 or 10 years.
Sure. When we took on our ordinance addressing short-term rentals, a target was put on the city of Lexington because we were trying to implement the most aggressive ordinance, if you will, in the entire state. And so there were legislators from 400 miles away that targeted the city of Lexington, and the Realtors Association essentially lobbied extensively against what we were trying to do to protect residential neighborhoods. And so where we did settle is that an Airbnb cannot be in a residential neighborhood unless it is the owner's primary residence and they can only rent it 45 nights a year. So within a commercial district, there is unlimited usage of Airbnb in the downtown commercial district, essentially. But in our residential neighborhoods, we've limited it to 45 nights, which has worked, I believe, well for us. Our system is complaint driven in the city of Lexington. We have a lodging tax of 10, 11%. So those folks do pay the same as a Hampton Inn or a different hotel. So we want to continue to to tweak it and not take it that it's perfect, but definitely it's good to hear from you that it's something that we should consider revisiting if it's not accomplishing its objectives. So thank you.
If there are no further questions, I again thank you for the robust report, the collaboration with our city staff and our community. This is very useful and insightful information, and we're grateful and hope that it helps you and that you get a great grade with the presentation. So thank you all for being with us. I'll give Professor the closing remarks there.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking us on and giving the students an opportunity to learn in a real life setting. So when we started this class, I told the students that the world is full of wicked problems. And when we started unraveling, looking at the size of the city of Lexington and just understanding, the ordinances that are in place and all the other things that we saw in comparison to other cities, we were like, this is a very interesting example. We've learned a lot during this process. I think the students have learned how to work in a team. They've learned how to communicate. And they've definitely learned how to do research and how things work out in real life. So I want to thank you so much, James, for this opportunity, and just thank the entire City Council for according us this opportunity to make the presentation today, but to do the study. And we look forward to collaborating with you as James Madison University in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And you all are welcome to continue Zooming and enjoy the stimulating meeting that we will proceed with. But if you would also like to disconnect, we certainly understand. Thank you all for being with us and have a great December.
Thank you very much.
Come see us.
Thank you.
Always fun to be exposed to great minds and thoughtful processes. So we're grateful for the students and this professor at James Madison University. Next item on the agenda is public hearings. And we have a public hearing in consideration, I will say, of the small cell wireless facilities. Arnie, thanks for being with us and bringing this forward.
Good evening to you all. A little transition from housing to telecommunications facilities. We have been working on for quite a number of months with the Planning Commission, with the Architectural Review Board, on a zoning text amendment for what ended up being the impetus for small cell facilities, but is actually for telecommunications in general. We provided you a quick presentation a couple of weeks ago, and this is the public hearing for that. The Planning Commission did make a recommendation unanimously in favor of the recommended changes. I'm not going to, I'm going to skip around a little bit. Please interrupt me as you need for questions, but I'm going to start on page 4 of 26, which is at least the 4 of 26 in this section of your particular packet. So we have proposed amendments being for the zoning chapter and to the streets and sidewalks chapter, and also to the design guidelines, which is a little bit different than the actual zoning chapter. So we typically typically do not provide you with strike through and underline. We normally provide you with the clean copy without strike through and underline. But I thought it would be helpful for you to see what we had in our ordinance, what needed to be changed in the several different sections, again, in the zoning chapter and also in streets and sidewalks. In the zoning chapter in particular, which again is page 4 of 26, that's the table of contents. Those items highlighted in yellow just to give you a quick reference to where changes are being proposed. The first one is in the use matrix. I'm just going to go through these, hit the highlights. And again, if you have questions, please interrupt. So if we flip over to the use matrix, we currently have broadcasting or communication towers. And because the easiest way to break this down was to lump these telecommunications facilities into either a standard process project or an administrative review eligible project, that's why you see the use matrix being divided in that way. So a standard process project is a conditional use permit, public hearing process, planning commission for recommendation, public hearing, and then comes to you for public hearing for your decision. And then those are currently conditional use permits in the parks and open space R1, R2, and in the C2, planning commission is making a recommendation that they also be added as a conditional use permit in the RM and RLC zoning district. The second category that we're adding that is new, excuse me, are administrative review eligible projects. I will get into the definition of that in a moment, but that is the second basket, if you will, and that would be by right in all of those if they can meet the use and design standards. So that's the note number 7, and the use and design standards are the many pages of new text that are being proposed. Are any further
Arnie, I'll
questions
just,
yet on the use matrix?
So sometimes I need some clarification. So when we look at the communication tower, for instance, in our RM district, B7 is the indication there. So if somebody wants to put a small cell tower in the residential multifamily, it would just need administrative review.
We will take a look with, it will have the little note saying it's permitted if the requirements of 420-11. So all the use and design standards are met. And it could be a small cell, it could be an administrative review eligible project, yes. But depending if it's a new structure, less than 50 feet in height and all the other stuff that comes along with that.
Okay. Thanks, sir.
For the Historic Downtown Preservation District and the Residential Historic Neighborhood Conservation District, no changes are proposed in the language in those two sections. However, they do have references to the design guidelines that were adopted a couple of years ago. So the recommendation is to change the design guidelines, add a new section G for facilities, and the underlined language that you see on the bottom half of page 7 of the report and going over to the top of page 8, those 7 standards are being recommended to be added to the design guidelines. So if their project is being proposed for either the historic districts, it needs to go to the Architectural Review Board. These are the design guidelines that they would be utilizing as their criteria for the determination of a certificate of appropriateness. Architectural Review Board went through these 4 different meetings, and Planning Commission also reviewed and makes a recommendation that these be included in the design guidelines. Again, that's a separate document. Then going on to page 8, use and design standards. You can see this is the majority of the new language that's being proposed. We did have broadcasting and communication towers with a few use and design standards that's being completely rewritten. The language that you see in blue was not thrown out completely. That does show up later in this reorganized section. So the blue language again is still in there. It's just a little bit further back. Going on to definitions and scope, there's a definition there for communication tower. And then below that, it says a project means, and those are important because it really divides things into a standard process project or an administrative review eligible project. Again, those are your 2 bigger baskets, and one of the sub baskets will be a small cell facility, but we'll get to that in a minute. So an administrative review eligible project is a new wireless support structure that is less than 50 feet in height, provided that it is less than 10 feet above the tallest utility poles within 500 feet. It's not located within a historic district. It's not located in a jurisdiction that expended 35% of its budget for undergrounding of utilities. I don't think we've ever done that. So that one we don't have to be concerned with. And it's a new wireless support structure is designed to hold and support small cell facilities. Or it's the co-location of any structure on any structure of a wireless facility that is not a small cell facility. Small cells have their own little section, so that's why you see the little kick out, and they're going to have their own particular rules and regulations for small cells. The important thing here is the administrative review eligible projects are the things that should have a fairly small impact. They're less than 50 feet in height. They are new structures, and then there would be a process for approving those. Any questions on administrative review eligible projects?
Barney, just when you talk about 50 feet in height, is that the location of it or the actual tower itself?
It's on a structure. It's a new wireless support structure.
Okay.
So not so much the antenna, but the structure. And that's another good distinction in that the review eligible are new structures, support structures. And then when we get to the small cells, those are most cases are just the equipment itself and the antenna. So there is a difference between the structure that they go on and the antenna and equipment that go along with them.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And then over on page 10, standard process project means any project that is not an administrative review eligible project. So again, we have 2 primary baskets. Something that's administrative review eligible shouldn't have a big impact. It gets reviewed by staff, which is the zoning administrator, who I happen to be, or it's a standard process project, conditional use permit comes through the public hearing process. I'm not going to go through the rest of, unless you have any questions about the rest of the definitions there. And I'll skip over to the conditional use permit section, which is top page 12. Again, all communication towers shall be handled as a standard process project, and that's sort of the default. It shall require a conditional use permit, but there are exceptions in section D. So if we're not doing those exceptions, it's a conditional use permit. It's going to come to you. It gives us all of your process requirements. One thing that we haven't seen before are shot clocks. Somebody hands in an application to me in the planning department. I have 10 days to review it to make sure that it's a complete application or not. And if it is a new structure, we have 150 days to get through the conditional use permit process. If it is a co-location on an existing structure, then we have 90 days. So they started putting time frames on us, or shot clocks, and we have to get through those. Otherwise, they are going to be approved automatically.
And is that state regulations or?
Regulation.
Okay.
Correct. I would not have done that to myself.
Right.
So a couple more pages, again, more about pre-application meetings and process and some criteria for you to consider when it does come to you. I'm not going to cover those unless there are questions.
I'm going to skip over to setback requirements on page 16. Those were brought forward from before. So if we do have a new tower, then there will be some setbacks equal 200% of the height of the tower. These are fairly standard for fall zone and whatnot. And that's also perhaps one reason to mention that in the C1 zoning district, you do not see transmission tower as a permitted use because you're likely not going to find a location where you have a 100-foot tower and have a 200-foot setback because we don't have the room to fit that type of tower or setback. And then going on to section D, which talks about exceptions. So by default, everything's a conditional use permit, standard process project, except for administrative review eligible projects. Again, those things that are less than 50 feet in height, and where if you add the antenna, it's not more than 10 feet above poles that are within 500 feet. So in theory, a small impact is expected from those. And those again go through my office as the zoning administrator.
In theory,
In theory.
small impact.
So we again have a whole bunch of process here, shot clocks again. And unless there are any questions about administrative review eligible projects, one of the other exceptions are temporary portable towers, also known as cell on wheels or COWs. If I'm not mistaken, WNL has used those for MockCon before. It's a cellular tower, comes in on a trailer or back of a truck. It's erected for a temporary period of time for no more than 60 days. And when MockCon is over, it goes back down and leaves. So that's, since it's temporary, it's exempted from the requirement for a conditional use permit. A small cell facility is also an exemption for a conditional use permit. And those are facilities installed on a wireless service provider on existing structures, provided the following requirements are met. I also need to perhaps remind you that a small cell facility is something with an antenna that is less than 6 cubic feet in size, and the equipment cabinet is less than 28 cubic feet in size. So it is a smaller type of wireless facility. It's not your macro tower, and it's not your micro facility either, which we'll get to in just a minute. And then with small cell facilities, again, a facility that goes on an existing structure, we have all of the process regulations provided here. I'll be answering questions on those. The one that I would like to highlight on page 20 is number 5 at the top, upper half of the page. It says small cell facilities shall only be permitted in the Lexington Downtown Historic Preservation District or in the residential neighborhood conservation districts if they meet the standards included in the Lexington Historic District Design Guidelines as amended and with a certificate of appropriateness approved by the Architectural Review Board. So that's one of the few places where we were allowed to have some latitude on small cell facilities in historic districts. And those are, again, those 7 or 8 criteria that we've already sort of covered quickly will be added to the design guidelines. The next item that is exempted from a conditional use permit is a micro wireless facility. It is even smaller. There's a definition for it. And it is so small that it hangs on existing cables or wires.
Oh.
And then the last item there says nothing herein shall be construed to exempt the applicant from the requirements of a franchise agreement. So if you are a wireless provider and you're going to be operating within our right of way or in our city, you still have to go through the franchise agreement process.
Arnie, can I ask a quick question? The micro wireless facilities, it says that that shall not be subject to a fee or a permit. Was that required by Virginia? Okay.
I don't recall specifically, but if it's in there that way, then I'm almost 100%
Okay.
sure that they would not allow us to have the fee.
Okay, thank you.
The lobby was very strong. The last part for the zoning on page 21, definitions, a couple of one definition was taken out, and then the communication tower was added to reflect the same definition from the state, and a slight modification to utility service minor to withdraw or remove any references to communication facilities because it's now in a new definition. So it didn't need to also be included in utility service minor. That's it for the zoning chapter. Any questions on the zoning amendments being proposed in particular?
One quick question. We have a couple of entities with master plans, if I'm saying the right term. Maybe not master plan, but master plans. And the process, they would be subject to all of this as well. So for instance, Washington Lee VMI and or the hospital came and wanted to do something.
Correct. I do not recall anything that would get them out of going through whichever part of this is applicable to their
them.
particular wireless or telecommunications facility.
Okay, thank you.
There's nothing else in the zoning. There are a few amendments being proposed to two sections of chapter 356, which is your streets and sidewalks chapter. These were being proposed by Jeff Martone, and I have to admit I have not run those by Patrick Madigan yet. But we do, because small cell and other facilities could be in the rights of way, where would you put those regulations? The easiest part was to expand the excavation permits, because that was already providing regulations to excavators and contractors on how to work within the right of way. So it was Jeff's recommendation that that be beefed up, not just for wireless facilities, but for other items as well. I'm not sure how often the streets and sidewalks chapter gets updated, but there are probably a few things in here other than just what's required for telecommunications facilities. And the same thing for section 9 or subsection 9 for wires, cables, and telecommunications. I probably won't be able to answer very specific questions on those if you have them, but I can also always get that for you if needed. Any questions on chapter 356? Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on November 10th, and they do make a recommendation in favor of the proposed amendments. That's all I have for proposal or for presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Arnie. Members of council have any questions of Arnie? Hearing none, thank you. Great job. And always interesting, the requirements that get shaped by our friends in Richmond. You've heard the proposal and the recommendation. I'd ask for council's consideration.
We have a public hearing?
Actually, I need to have a public hearing first. Thank you. Get so excited. At this time, I'd like to open this topic to a public hearing and invite anyone who would like to speak to this matter to please raise your hand or step forward. Seeing and hearing no one, I will close the public hearing at 8:11 and ask for council's consideration.
I move to approve the proposed text amendments as presented regarding communication towers.
A second.
Have a motion, a second, any discussion? Leslie, any comments or observations from you all dealing with it on the planning commission level?
Thank you to Arnie and Kate for doing a lot of research to navigate us through it. We learned a lot on this.
It's amazing how many details there are out there, especially dealing with communications. I'd ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes, and they were in your packet. And unless there's an objection, we will approve those as presented. Hearing no objections, they stand approved. Next item is citizens' remarks and comments. I didn't see that anyone had signed up, but this is the time we open the floor for folks from the community to share your thoughts or wisdom with City Council. Is there anyone who would like to speak to council this evening? Mary Ellen, welcome. Please, as customary, state your name and address for the record. And thank you for being with us.
I'm Mary Ellen. Okay. I'm Mary Ellen Cook. I live at 4 North Lewis Street. What I took away from the presentation on the housing PowerPoint we viewed, one thing really jumped out at me was that only 30, and perhaps I misinterpreted it, but it was mentioned that only 35% of Lexington land is taxable. Did you hear that too, Mayor?
Yes, ma'am. It's actually incorrect. So just, I'll let you finish, but I do want to correct the record. I'm sorry. I'll let you finish.
Okay, okay. Now, we were also talking about the difference. Mr. Alligood brought up the fact that we sat through many city council meetings back in the spring and summer about the selling of the Spotswood property. And I remain quite quiet about the proposals because neither of them to me seem like a good proposal based on the fact that we hear on a regular basis that we need more affordable housing in this city. And yet we have this precious parcel of land on Spotswood. And I did not hear the insistence on the part of the community that it be affordable housing rather than market rate housing. Perhaps I missed the boat on that one, but it bothered me a lot that we did not. We were very thankful when Sam Krickenberger and Habitat for Humanity came through for us with the idea of developing some affordable housing at the edge of town on South Main Street. That to me was a bit of a phew, we dodged that bullet. But why we didn't insist as a city, a very affluent city for many of us, that particular tract of land be designated for affordable housing is something that I think needed to at least be discussed. And it doesn't seem like it was. Perhaps if the selected developer doesn't come through with a plan and is given the option of withdrawing a plan, that perhaps it will still be a topic of discussion in another year or two. But I'd like to at least broach that subject. We hear about it so much. Okay. Okay. So, and then the second thing I have to ask for, even though I feel like citizen comments are sometimes in the wrong place on the minutes. I feel like after everyone's given their reports, I'm like, I wish I could have said something, but this is not a classroom. I can't raise my hand. Mayor Friedman would tell me, stick to the program. Okay, so I would like, just as put the idea in your head that when we get to section 12, mayor, okay, and we have a consideration for the appointment of an interim city attorney, I would just like to know what kind of decision was made, whether it was probably mutual, but maybe not, on not, I know that Jared Jenkins has been prohibited from appearing before Rockbridge County Circuit Court for the near future, perhaps for the rest of his life. But I would just like to know what kind of decision-making went on when you decided that Jared Jenkins wouldn't be here at the tonight's meeting, maybe last meeting too. I was not in attendance. But what kind of decision-making went on rather than just blow over that and get right to the appointment of an interim city attorney? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being with us and sharing your observations. There are items that will be addressed perhaps under my report. I'd also direct you to the minutes from the last meeting where we did detail why Jared is not sitting in this seat and the termination of the contract by the Mann Legal Group with the city. So, and that's brought us to where we'll be considering appointment for an interim because we do need to have an attorney to represent us and support us in our meetings. And I would encourage you to seek out council members and or staff for the discussion of the calculation of tax exempt properties. It's an interesting topic and one that we could speak for hours about. These city council meetings are structured for the opportunity for folks in the community to come and speak, but it's not to have debate and conversation and an academic exchange of ideas. We certainly can do that as friends and neighbors and representatives available to you most any time, as opposed to this structured setting. So you're right. I try and run a tight meeting where we focus on the business at hand that's been advertised and give people an opportunity to speak their mind on the issues and circumstances. But instead of a count pointer count, or, you know, can you elaborate on, you know, the Brushy Hill Trail, and having meetings, go on with conversation for hours, at a respected council and their families. We try and keep it structured, and then, am available, just about any day, for conversation or details. And certainly that's what staff's here for as well, to help discern those numbers. But the topic of affordable housing, I fear will never go away and should not unless we can find decent homes for all folks. And it's important that we do keep that in our discussion. And that's threshold is going to play an important role in that in the past years and also in our future. So, but thank you. Sorry for my diatribe, but I appreciate your insights and glad that you're here. Are there other members of the community who would like to speak to council this evening? Hearing the dull roar of the HVAC, we will close the citizens' remarks and comments and go to our consent agenda.
Could we, though, since a presentation occurred that would be in the official record that made a statement that is factually incorrect about a very important topic in the city of Lexington, could the city manager correct the record and that it is not 65% of land, like geography, that is
you've got and you offered, so please go right ahead. And
I'm happy to do it, or I would cede to the city manager, because we do not, in your tight ship, we do not, city council members should not respond to the public, but I'd like to have the city manager correct the record, because it was incorrect, and wouldn't want that to be repeated since it's not correct.
Thank you, Councilmember Sigler. You are correct that information provided in the presentation was not factual. What we really see is that 65% of the value, the assessed value of our structures and property are not taxable. So when you look at the total value of, say, Virginia Military Institute or the hospital or Washington and Lee University, our churches, et cetera, our schools, those are not taxable. It's not the actual physical land of the city.
And what skews that is when 4 acres on North Main Street have a $50 million indoor track or $50 million pool on 4 acres, when 4 acres somewhere else in the city might have 20 houses that are much more modest and assessed at a total of $1 million, you know, like, so that starts to skew that percentage. So just, yeah, sorry.
If it's helpful, on page 136 in this document, for enlightenment, in 2013, our tax exempt real property value was just over $600 million. Our total taxable value that is not tax exempt was $620 million. In 2022, tax exempt value was over $1 billion. Total taxable value was 655 million. So taxable value has done this, tax exempt has done this.
Thus-
I follow this too.
And the acre stayed the same.
Yeah.
Same, still 2.5 square miles. Yeah, so don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that our neighbors with Washington Lee and VMI, as well as don't forget, we have a significant number of churches who own tax exempt property and make improvements and increase their tax exempt value. So thank you for setting the record straight. The numbers are always interesting from that perspective, but we still have the same 2.5 square miles and enjoy them in the trails around our city.
And we still have bills that are paid for by that 35% valuation on assessments.
Exactly. So when we have an opportunity to increase the revenue from a piece of property like Spotswood, it's prudent to be able to continue to pay for the services we have and not increase the taxes on the folks that are here. But yeah, it's the tax exempt $75 million indoor tracks and $40 million swimming pools are significant. So perhaps another work session, an opportunity for a fun discussion. Jim, do you have something to add? Oh, okay. Any other observations, comments? I know the professor's with us and looks like she's still listening in. So we welcome the opportunity to chat about that offline if you want to have further discussion or clarification on that. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and I'd welcome council's consideration for the items before you.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. It certainly includes the abstracts of votes for the November 2022 election, the audit report, and request from Stephanie Ring for a street closure on Saturday, December 31st, 2022. As it's on the consent agenda, there is no discussion. I would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler. Aye. Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, and encourage everyone to party in the streets on December 31st. Next item is unfinished business, and I call on the city manager for comment on the continued discussion and consideration of amending the noise ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That really is just a placeholder at this time, requiring no action from city council. City attorney and I and staff are working on some of the comments that you made in areas where you'd like to see some change. I do plan on bringing that back to you in January, so there's no action required tonight.
Any questions of the city manager? Just inquisitive. Next item on the report or on the agenda. Thank you, ladies, for being with us. Reports from boards and commissions, the Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Smith.
No report.
Thank you, sir. Main Street Lexington, Ms. Strawn.
Well, it's that time of year. Play Love Lex Lotto now and turn in your completed card by December 23rd for a chance to win $1,000 shopping spree. The Christmas parade is tomorrow, Friday, December 2nd. The theme is Sounds of the Season. The Jingle Bell Run is Saturday, December 3rd at 10 a.m. There are 2 new Christmas activities this year. The Dickens Carolers will be strolling down Main Street to help bring cheer on Friday, December 9th from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Join us downtown for late night shopping, eating, sipping, and singing. Shops will be open until 7 p.m. Also, tour downtown churches from 4 to 6 p.m. on Friday, December 16th. There's free gift wrapping of your purchases made downtown is available on Saturday, December 17th from 2 to 5 p.m. in a location to be announced. Individual businesses are also offering lots of fun activities, so check out the Main Street Lexington newsletter for more details. And if you are unsure of the perfect gift for someone on your list, consider a Main Street Lexington gift certificate. They're available at Just Games, Shenandoah Attic and Victorian Parlor, or at the Main Street office or on their website. That's all I have.
Can you expound on the church open house or tour?
Right. The downtown churches are just opening their doors for people to come in and look, since a lot of people haven't visited the churches and most of them are looking especially nice during the Christmas season. It was another way to get people downtown and to see something they hadn't seen before.
Sort of a church open house on the 16th. And what are the hours?
From 4 to 6 p.m.
4 to 6 p.m. Terrific. So you can come down, see all the beautiful churches and their decorations, go out for dinner and make a night of it in downtown Lexington.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ms. Strawn. Planning Commission.
We have not met since our last meeting. However, at our December 8th meeting, we will consider the conditional use permit application by Echelon Resources for development of the Spotswood property for multifamily housing.
Still overwhelmed from the small cell tower discussion. Very good. Thank you. Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Ayers.
Yeah, tourism won't meet again until Wednesday, December 14th, and that will be a joint meeting at the Horse Center with Rockbridge Outdoors for the Drive 2.0 workshop in pursuit of an outdoor recreation grant. Leslie's already mentioned the Christmas parade tomorrow, but I also want to put in the Jingle Bell Run, but I also wanted to put in a plug for the Buena Vista Christmas Market on Saturday, starting at 8 a.m. at the Buena Vista Fire Department. Santa Claus will be there from 11 to 12 if anyone wants to say hello and plead their case about being good this year. Also on Saturday from 11 to 1, Friends of the Chessie Trail will be sponsoring a geology walk. Washington and Lee Professor Chris Connors will lead a 1.5-mile walk and discuss the geology of the trail. And those who wish to participate should meet at the kiosk at 11 at the Lexington end of the trail. And that's my report.
Terrific. Any questions for Dennis?
What's the date on that trail walk?
I believe it's this Saturday from 11 to 1. What, are you bummed you can't make it?
Yes.
I think I'm going to go. I'll give you a
Can't make it.
report. Okay.
Fantastic. Lots of good opportunities to get outdoors. Hope the weather cooperates. Rockbridge Area Recreation Organization, Mr. Ziegler.
So tonight is the Buena Vista Holiday Parade, and the RARO cheerleaders are participating in that event. And then tomorrow night, they will participate in Lexington's parade. So please look for our cheerleaders that are out there braving the cold. Also, basketball is, in full swing right now. We do typically take a pause over the holidays since a lot of families may travel and we might lose some of our coaches if they happen to be WNL students or teachers or professors that may leave the area. As we look to the spring, RARO continues to look at new offerings. We're looking at adult soccer, for example. And so RARO would love to continue to hear from citizens. Softball went well last year, and we want to continue to try to provide opportunities for everyone within the two cities and the county. One point I'd like to mention, we do continue to need not necessarily volunteers. We will pay you if you would like to be an official at our athletic events, whether that be basketball official or an umpire or something to that effect. We continue to need officials and site supervisors. We use a lot of gyms. You always hear me talk about all of the gymnasiums that we use throughout the cities and the county. But one of the responsibilities that RARO has to the school boards that allow us to use their facilities is that we will have a paid site supervisor. That's a requirement for safety purposes, just someone that knows what to do if something were to happen. And we need site supervisors. It's not necessarily challenging, doesn't pay great, but it's serving the community and being around young people. And so I just want to mention that. And if either of those opportunities appeal to folks in the community, please contact the RARO office. So really, that's the conclusion of my report. Thanks.
Any questions for Mr. Ziegler? Snickering down here as you talk about officiating. I remember one of the most enjoyable things with RARO when my children were participating is at the beginning of the season for basketball, at least, they would have the coaches serve as referees at the beginning just to get a feel and see what they could see, because we all know that all officials are blind. And when I had a short tenure as an ump in baseball, and I was thankful when my time had been served and I was no longer. It's a tough job. It takes special people.
Umpires don't get paid by the hour. by the
Right.
game. So the strike zone needs to be large.
Exactly. Thank you very much for that report and for the good work your board and executive director are doing in our community and getting people away from their devices and in the fields. Threshold, Miss Alexander.
Threshold won't meet again until January 25th at 4 o'clock. Normally we meet in City Hall, but that is normally to be arranged.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions for Miss Alexander? Well, you received an application and I plan to bring forward some names at our next meeting for consideration for Threshold specifically, as well as some other appointments. Mr. Alligood, Maury Service Authority.
The board didn't meet yet. However, there is an important workshop scheduled for this coming Tuesday at the Horse Center at 5 o'clock to discuss the wastewater plant modernization report from the consultants. They will present their report to the MSA board. That's the primary purpose of the meeting. It's open to the public, but it's an opportunity for all of us that care to know about the projected expenses that are on the table, potentially on the table for modernizing the wastewater plant. Currently, the number that's floating around is $40 million. So we'll hear more. And there's been some mention made about contractors' bids being higher than the estimates that are prepared. And so we'll be eager to hear what those numbers turn out to be come Tuesday night, next Tuesday, December 6th. And the following week, we'll have a combination November and December MSA board meeting. So 2 for 1 on that. And that meeting is scheduled for not here. Normally it's here, but at the water treatment plant headquarters on Osage Lane. So 2 different locations for those meetings, but the big one is next Tuesday at the Horse Center.
Thank you, Mr. Alligood. Any questions for Mr. Alligood in regards to the MSA? Very good. Plenty of opportunities to meet with your friends and neighbors and learn what's going on with big capital projects in our community. Next is my report, and I will begin with asking council's consideration of appointment of interim city attorney. I'll point out Jeremy from Gwynn and Waddell came about very quickly because of the notification from Man Legal Group to terminate their contract with us. And I wasn't sure, didn't get a chance to talk to Jeremy to find out if we needed an MOU or a contract, but he reviewed his rates at our last meeting and said that they didn't need any type of MOU, their work at will. And so we will have an interim for the time that we have the need for one until we perform an RFP or some other form of seeking a permanent solution for our legal services. But it was, Jeremy pointed out, it's appropriate for us to have a vote and consider or to appoint an interim city attorney for the foreseeable future. Jeremy, anything you want to add on?
Well, I was just going to say that the reason for appointing an interim city attorney is there are documents that occasionally have to be signed, and for me to have the authority to sign them, could be deeds, it could be contracts. For me to have the authority to sign them, I just would like to have the imprimatur of the city council saying for me to do so.
Very good. Thank you, Jeremy. Any questions that council has?
Just one. So if you could let everyone know what our tentative schedule is for going out for a RFP.
I'm going to look at city manager. He's working on the RFP expeditiously. If you want to, I think you want to speak to it in your report.
Okay.
We'll address it there.
So I move to approve the legal firm of Gwynn, Waddell, Carroll, and Lockerbie as our interim city attorney representation.
Second.
Have a motion, a second, any discussion? Hearing none, I would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Alligood?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Jeremy, thank you for your service. And you're official now, so you can sign.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A couple other items that I'd like to just share with council and the community. Received an email from Randy Kaiser yesterday. If Randy's name is remotely familiar, he's been the engineer for the Stanton district for VDOT and been an employee and dedicated employee of VDOT for I think the last 35 years. Heck of a good guy, been based in the Stanton area and been very, very cooperative and supportive and helpful with projects that we've had here. And just want to acknowledge his service to the Commonwealth and specifically the Valley and Lexington, and wish him much health and happiness in retirement. There's an interim falling in behind him before a permanent will be appointed, but that will be forthcoming in the coming months. And to respond modestly, I've been thinking a little bit as we're sitting here, the opportunity for citizens' remarks and comments. I frequently have citizens that say, you know, it'd be so nice if we could have a public forum and we could sit down and talk about things and, you know, whatever topics. And that's certainly what our work sessions are to a certain degree. But I also want to hold up the Chamber of Commerce, who has worked to solicit members of the electorate, folks that have been elected, myself, the mayor of Buena Vista, and most recently Senator Deeds. Ronnie Campbell, our delegate, was also involved in that. What I found really disappointing is despite their best efforts for advertising, communicating, nobody showed up from the public to talk about things that were on their mind. So I encourage to keep your ear to the rail. And again, offer that we're available if you have topics that you want to discuss and learn more about. That's part of our responsibility and role. But again, I want to uplift the chamber and the work that Tracy Lyons and her team has done for organizing these roundtables for that very purpose. So we've got the tools out there, just need to make use of them. Lastly, wanted to thank Skip Hess specifically and his partner Kurt for their vision in creating the Candlelight Processional, which is, I think, in its 27th year, maybe 28th, almost 3 decades, and was a beautiful Friday night last Friday. And thank you to Main Street Lexington and Rebecca and her team for the holiday festivities that are taking place and the many, many, many volunteers that make it all happen, especially with our parade tomorrow night and some of the other things going on. But tomorrow's a wonderful and special event in our community. And lastly, thanks to Public Works, Police Department, and Lexington Fire Department for their support in making all these things happen. It was mentioned, or it's not lost on me the many hours that they dedicate to keeping us safe through all these events. So when you see them, please express your appreciation. Join me in expressing our appreciation. And that is all I have to report. And I'll call on the city manager for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a follow-up to your report and to answer Councilmember Strawn's questions, I've been working with my government peers up and down the valley to get examples of how they've recruited an attorney or seen an attorney recruited. And I do have good responses from both friends here at home, Rockbridge County and Buena Vista, as well up to Shenandoah County. So I'll be evaluating those and I'll get back to you at the next meeting as to, you know, what has been done and what you can look to do as far as what meets our needs best in that regard. In a somewhat similar fashion, I've been working with our friends at the Berkeley Group to develop an RFP for the development and finding partners for the development of the former VDOT site. So that RFP will probably be ready at the first of the year and go out the first half of January, allowing a very good period of time for responses from developers and partners throughout the state who may be interested in our site. So that's the schedule. I can't tell you exactly when I'll have that back in for review. And I'll develop a process that I'll also share with you as far as how those responses will be reviewed. So Some updates from the Police Department. Corporal Lewis provided a free crime prevention assessment for the business at 126 Walker Street recently. Corporals Hart Barger and Lewis and Officer Dreeland attended first line supervisor training in Roanoke. Chief Green accepted a $3,000 donation to the Police Foundation at the annual meeting of the Community Foundation, I believe about a week and a half ago. Corporal Stogdale provided a safety presentation at City Hall for juvenile probation officers from throughout our region. And we had 6 accreditation assessors present at the department for a mock assessment to prepare for the accreditation assessment coming in January next month. The Mounted Unit raised $911 from parking for the VMI home game against Citadel just over a week ago. And so that's a nice donation coming from folks from out of town who come to enjoy the football games at VMI. From the fire department on Thanksgiving Day, another unusual call, but the department responded to a fire involving 15 round bales of hay. So they were out fighting a fire on some farmer's haystack. The department is working with the Rockbridge High School and Rockbridge County Fire and Rescue to host 12 high school EMT students for ride-alongs in department ambulances. And this is a requirement for the EMT curriculum and a great training opportunity for those individuals. Plans are in place to host students both in the near term and on a continuing basis. In close calls, the department responded to smoke at the Rats building just north end of town, where they found a malfunctioning heater. In a similar fashion, at a call at a house on West Nelson Street, they found a smoking wall outlet, and both times larger problems were averted. The department responded to a rollover of a tractor trailer of new cars on I-81 and a house fire on Borden Grant Road recently. We all know that Washington University had appealed the decisions of our building inspector and safety inspector regarding some improvements or renovations to the chapel on the campus. And they have said they will not appeal that decision to the state appeals board. However, they will come back to work with our building inspector and our fire department, our fire marshal, to see if they can find other ways of meeting their renovation needs in that space. Some changes in the skate park. The Skate Park Coalition is adding some safety rails and slide rails in the park, and also some steel and concrete pads for performing tricks. These will be added by that organization. Public Works will supervise that, but we're not involved in that. Let you know, my holiday schedule will involve some vacation time. The kids and Deb have decided we should be in Colorado for the Christmas season. So we'll be, I'll be taking vacation on the 21st through the 29th. Staff will be available to take care of any needs of the city, but if you need me, you can call me, you can text me, or you can email me, because I will have my computer and my phone. The last thing I would mention is on that consent agenda item, street closure for New Year's Eve. I did speak with Stephanie from the Georges. That original proposal was for an extended street closure, time-wise and geographically in the downtown. And after our discussion, she agreed that they didn't need as much space. They had originally talked about Nelson to Henry and on Washington Street from Randolph to Jefferson. And it was from 4 p.m. until 1 a.m. She was estimating on the high side of as to who would be out there in the street for 4 or 5 hours on New Year's Eve. So she, with some easy conversations, shortened that time period to the one you approved. I did note to her, and I will note to you, that in the future, we will need to charge for that. There's still some extensive time required from both Public Works and the police department on New Year's Eve to come out and police an event of that nature. So, she'll get a pass this year. We want to support the event, but we need to start charging for that time. So you'll see that in the future. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, very good. Thankful to the Georges for picking up the New Year's Eve ball drop that Robert E. Lee, the Gin, had done in the past. Any questions for the city manager? Well, just suffice to say, happy spouse, happy house. So your wife's telling you need to be in Colorado for Christmas. Good response. City Attorney Jeremy, anything to add to the cause?
Just briefly, just to let you know, since I've come on board, I've been working with Jim on the noise ordinance. He did send me some updated revisions since the last meeting.
Can you lean into your mic a little bit?
Yep. Sorry. Jim sent me some revisions to the noise ordinance that I'm going to take a look at. I've taken one look at, and we're going to speak and then make some edits and get them back to you in January. I've also been working with Arnie on some zoning enforcement matters. Just wanted to let you know what I've been working on.
Terrific. Thank you, sir. Any questions for the city attorney? Newly appointed interim city attorney. Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Next item is new business, financing the purchase of the ladder truck for the Lexington Fire Department. And we'll call on Jen to walk us through the numbers. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. So the ladder truck is scheduled to arrive mid to late January. I've reached out to VML VACO to get some indications on what we could expect in regard to interest rates. And they sent me a preliminary analysis at a 5, 7, and 10-year borrowing. You'll notice that the projected interest rate is the same at both the 7-year and 10-year mark. And in this initial briefing that I prepared, I was recommending that we go with the 7-year and just save some on interest payments. However, upon further reflection and understanding now that we can also prepay with the lender if we decide to pay it off early, I would change my recommendation to council and recommend we go with the 10-year financing. And if we have the means or the desire, go ahead and pay it off sooner. And I would like to highlight some of the work that the city manager did with our community partners that ended up in us receiving funding commitments from them for fire and rescue equipment that can actually be used also to help fund this ladder truck. So both WNL and VMI have generously agreed to a $350,000 commitment over 10 years. And Kendall, their board just last week, I believe it was, agreed to commit to $5,000 for this coming year. And they also agreed to revisit that annually when they're going through their budget cycle. So unless there are questions.
And I have a quick question for you. I just want to make sure I understand. So the county is paying $21,000 per year towards financing the truck, but if we pay it off early, do they, I mean, is that a commitment to pay that $21,000 for 10 years, regardless of whether we pay it off early?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to check on that.
And it's actually a 20 years for a ladder truck per the contract.
And can you remind me, the 800,000 from our general fund surplus, was that actually going to be a ARPA money or?
No, that was true surplus from FY21. So
that we put toward the ladder truck.
we did state that and to earmark it toward that. I do recommend that we finance the full cost though and keep that 800,000 as sort of a rainy day or safety blanket fund should we need it.
New trucks generally run well and operate beautifully, but in the event they don't.
Just in case.
Yes. So that money will be set aside in the general fund? Will it be
Right
earmarked?
now it's sitting in the equipment replacement fund.
Okay, very good. Good questions. Any other questions? If not, I'd ask for council's consideration.
So my ask of you tonight is just to authorize the city manager to sign the financing agreements that would be necessary to affect this funding.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion, a second. Jim, before you step away, to confirm 4.5 is the projected. We won't know what the actual interest rate is until the deal is done.
Exactly. And I should probably know it within a week or so. And additional indications that I received from VML VACO just today tell me that we can probably do a little bit better than that 4.5%. It may be in like the 3.5 to 4.25 range.
Yep.
That's more than a little bit.
Yeah,
I like to downplay things.
10-year treasury has declined from about 4.5 to 3.5 in the past probably 45 days. So to our benefit, thankfully. Very good. We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? If not, roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Mr. Alligood?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Let the truck roll. Thank you all very much. Unanimous approval for the financing, directing the city manager to move forward with financing of the ladder truck. I'm not aware of any other business to come before council. Any closing comments? Chuck?
Just one. I left you all with a Friends of Natural Bridge State Park membership flyer. We have a member meeting Monday evening at the park at 6 o'clock. You can join for as little as $25 to get you free admission to the park for a year. And you see different levels of membership. We got luminary nights coming up next weekend, Friday and Saturday, with carriage rides for an additional cost on Sundays for the next 2 weekends, starting next weekend. But
Excellent.
come on out, check it out. The luminaries down at the bridge at night are something to behold.
Another treasure in our community, and thank you for bringing that forward. Natural Bridge is a beautiful place and a treat to visit. So if you haven't been lately, encourage you to stroll down to Natural Bridge and check it out. And you can always swing by Great Valley Farm Brewery and wet your whistle on the way home. No other business come before us. We will stand adjourned. Have a great night and a better weekend. And don't forget about the parade tomorrow. Mainly, don't try and drive downtown at 5 o'clock tomorrow.